This is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, the last Wednesday of the year. And if it is noon on Wednesday, then it is Writing Wednesday when I answer your writing questions, your craft questions, your business questions, your psychological questions, existential questions, um, everything having to do with writing, which, because we are the writers, that would be everything. So, welcome to Writing Wednesday. It is New Year's Eve, so it's a time that many of us do our evaluations of the year, and I certainly do. I tend to have an introspective New Year's Eve. That's what I do. And then fortune telling tomorrow. So, welcome and hi, Hope. Um, if you have questions for me today, put them in the chat and I can answer them as we go along. And if you have questions for me in between Writing Wednesdays, please send me your questions at my website, janetfitchwrites.com, and I can design a Writing Wednesday around your question, as I'm doing today with a question from Mark about workshopping. And if you have a desire to see me continue to do this, please subscribe. And that also definitely encourages me to keep going at this. It's been, I don't even know how many years I've been doing it. Maybe 4 or 5. I think I started in the pandemic. So welcome and Happy New Year. So let's dive in to the question at hand. Okay, this is from Mark, and Mark, I hope you're here. If not, probably watching. These are always archived, so you can go through the library and see any Writing Wednesdays that you've missed. Today's question reads from Mark is providing insightful writing group critiques. Hi, Janet. Hope you're enjoying the holidays. I'd appreciate advice on an issue. I began writing in earnest when I joined a weekly Zoom writing critique group 2 years ago. We first post our weekly writing online. Then, during the meeting, we read our work aloud, which is a really nice way to run a online writing group, because when you read aloud, you hear things that the eye doesn't see. So you can feel things that you didn't feel before. And there's something about doing it in a writing group, because the minute you know that there's somebody else listening, you'll find you see the work differently. You instantly can say, oh my God, that doesn't work, when it's coming out of your mouth. So this is a wonderful way to work. So we read our work aloud, and other members provide oral critique. Some members additionally leave written comments on the documents. The other members provide perceptive, insightful comments and criticisms. I, however, struggle to deliver discerning feedback. I find it frustrating and even stressful trying to come up with the type of helpful feedback that seems to flow naturally from the other writers. I want to contribute to the group in the same way they assist me with my writing. I'd love to hear suggestions. Thank you, Janet. From Mark. Well, Mark, I hope you're here. And this is such an interesting question. So what this group does is they read aloud. Everybody has the work in front of them. And I do recommend you writing on their document if it seems like that is part of the way this group shares. There must be, they send maybe it in Word so that everybody can type on it. This is the way my writers group works as well. And so I think that I can help with this because this is the way my writers group works, and this is the way I was raised as a baby writer. Um, First and foremost, you have to think, and if you ever have workshop with me at the Community of Writers, I'll be there this summer. I will be giving this exact talk. Um, First thing is do no harm. Uh, you're not there to count coup of all the things you can find wrong with a manuscript. You know, the person who receives the critique, the writer, um, if they think that you're just trying to make points against them and make, uh, find things wrong with their work, they just won't listen to you. And then if they think you're a jerk, or, I don't think Mark worries about that. I think he's maybe got the opposite problem. But in workshop, generally you're looking for constructive feedback, things that will help the work. So when you listen to it, think, or, when you're, there's crit that you can annotate while the person's reading, and then things that you will assemble for that person after they are done. Um, Remember that in workshop, think of the one or two things that they can do with the manuscript that will improve it 100%, 90%, even 50%. Because you're not the only one in the group. So you don't have to solve all their problems. You're not their editor. Um, so think of what you could say that would actually improve the book, or the piece in front of you, the scene or whatever. What would make it 80% better? One thing. So you don't feel, the person doesn't feel like you're nitpicking their work. Hi, Jill. Good to see you. Um, I think that when people are reading, you hear things that strike a chord. Don't let that go by. So type that on the work as it's being read, like a particularly nice phrase. Encouraging is really good. You hear a nice phrase, write nice in the right on the manuscript exactly where you've heard it. Hi Marie, good to see you. Um, if something, any choice word or phrase or description, you know, do it right there. Don't wait until you have to read it again. Um, uh, you're going to lose that immediacy. Nice, good, wow. If I'm reading on the page, if I have a hard page, I'll check it. I'll give checks and underlines. But that's a harder system to do when you're listening and reading it online on a screen. So develop a system of how you're going to write approval. Nice, wow, good, you know, uh-oh, I mean, suspense, uh-oh, um, and try to get it in there as the person is speaking. Um, let's see. So other members provide perceptive, insightful comments and criticisms. I struggle to deliver discerning feedback and find it stressful that he is not able to do that on the spot. It is it's a talent you develop. Um, it's nice to have, when you're on the page, if you've printed out and you're writing with a pen, you can develop a system of symbols that help are kind of shorthand. So for instance, I when I'm doing it on the page, if there's a problematic phrase, a problematic sentence, problematic bit of dialogue, etc., circle. I circle that. And a special circle with a C on the circle is for cliche. But when you're writing, you can just call, you just call it as you see it, cliche, because often the writer doesn't realize that they're writing a cliche. Um, they they might have been deep into their story and focused on the story and forget that anything you've ever heard before ever is a cliche and is banned. That's not why people read, is to see some warmed over bit of language, which is a sentence level problem. And you don't want to be the person who's always like shoving their nose in the doggy do, frankly, in a workshop situation. So when you see cliches, you just be careful of how you address it once the discussion begins. You know, you can just look at it as somebody is, if they're, it's like the tag on their shirt is showing. It's like, oh, and there were some cliches in here you might want to watch for. Keep it on the down low, you know, um, just as a little aside, um, because nobody wants to be that person. It's like the person who always finds the typo. Yeah, it's like you want to be really play that down, but catch it so that that person realizes, oh, this is part of writing, is that you have to write and not just regurgitate language that's been used before. You also want to notice, you're going to notice when words are being used more than once. Everybody does it. I do it. And my writers group, when I read it out loud, when I get to the second time I've repeated the word, even I notice it and put 2 times, 3 times. But, maybe people haven't started paying attention to repetition. So you can just write 2x as you're doing the crit on that. And then that would be something later on. You might not bring it up in workshop. You might end up just sending them the manuscript and then they can see, oh, 2 times, 3 times I've reused that word, fence post, or I've reused the word, uh, old, or reused, anyway, whatever word they're overemphasizing. But I would start with the largest crit, um, the 80% that would make it 100% better. Just one note that would make it 80% better. And usually I would start on the story level. Scene story is where I would start, because that's the thing most people are interested in, frankly. You'll get to it all, but it's the one that is going to hurt people's feelings the least and the thing that they want the most. Whereas when you start getting into some of these other things that are extremely helpful, you have to start being careful about not being that person who's always pointing out the typo. Okay, so let's start with scene and story. So when they're done reading, then you let it sit with you. Usually it's a scene that they've given, because that's a nice length. It's usually 6 to 8 pages. Um, and think about story. Think about change. Every scene has a change. The character cannot leave the scene with the same emotion that they came in with. And so you can ask yourself, or you can ask that person, it's like, I don't if you don't see a change, if you don't see what the scene is for, sometimes time elapses and people might even have a conflict, but nothing is resolved, nothing happens, nothing changes. It's like we yell at each other and then we're going to have that scene again and yell at each other. We come in mad, we leave mad, nothing happens. So the first thing you can do is look for the change, and then ask yourself, uh, what actually. Or you can say this. You can say, okay, I really enjoyed, your, Peppy and Miranda's scene here, but what really happens here? What changes here? And often it's latent in the scene, but you can help that person bring out, really highlight the change and make sure that it's there for to propel the next scene. So there's a lot of scenes in people's writing that people wander around. They go from party to party. This party sucks. They go to the next party. They smoke a bowl. And then they maybe hook up with somebody, and nothing. But nothing really happens emotionally. It's an emotional medium, and if we don't change the emotion in a scene, then you don't really have a scene, and you don't really need it. There's got to be a change. You come into the party, you know, really excited, looking great. You got invited by some, say some, handsome dude, and you're all excited, and it's going to be the party of your life, and then it ends up as a rape, or it ends up in abandonment, or it ends up in humiliation. So you go from joy to humiliation, joy to, despair, joy to something else. Um, then you have a scene. If nothing happens that changes the mood, you don't have a scene. So that's something that you can always watch for. Watch for story and scene problems. Is there, then we go, you can look for, that's a good, definitely one to look for, is change. Um, I think that the next thing that you might look for is dialogue. Look at the dialogue. Most people write too much dialogue. So see if you can help them compress it. See if you can get rid of anything. If there seems to be a lot of meat and greed, cut it. When I'm typing on somebody's work, somebody in my workshop, my own writers group, um, I'll put brackets, and I put all my notes in caps so it's easy to tell from the, you know, typing. Um, I will bracket what I think doesn't shouldn't be there, and I can sometimes say skip or cut in caps. I usually have the caps lock on, and so watch for compression in dialogue and see if you can help them get rid of a lot of the unnecessary dialogue. You know, um, you can say do in narr, N-A-R-R, do it in narrative. This is not for, this is exposition. Um, you can, so that when you give them your notes, you run your eyes over what you've written, and some things are small, and don't bother talking, using class time, using your group time to nitpick every little thing that they do wrong. Start with the big things, story, then look at dialogue and say, I think in this exchange about the money here, I think that people are saying what anybody would say. I think that you need to heighten the characterization in the dialogue, that we need to say things that only these people would say at this moment. And You might find there's no conflict, everybody agrees. I have a wonderful, one of the people in my writers group is very strong on conflict and mess things up for the people. Don't make it so easy for the people. This is too easy. You'll find in any workshop, certain people kind of specialize in certain kinds of critique. So when they're all together, when everybody shows up, um, this person is really good on the earthiness and the reality of things and wants more detail. This person is really good on conflict. They'll point out when you're ducking the blows, when there needs to be more conflict in the scene. There'll be somebody who is sentence oriented and will often have sentence commentary. So you'll see the different personalities in your group, and you don't have to do it all. But it's good to be able to do it all. And then there might be certain things that always interest you, that you're watching for in particular. So another thing to watch for in the dialogue is cut the meet and greet. Watch for on the nose when people just say what 99% of all people would say, uh, rather than coming at it sideways, you know. Um, I think that subtext is very important in dialogue. So you can say, I think they're, uh, what do they say in acting? They're playing the text, not the subtext. So try to play the subtext. Um, if something just happened, the characters don't have to say it happened because the reader is the recipient of all information, not the other characters. If we already know it, I don't want to hear somebody tell us what we just saw. I want to hear an attitude. So, dialogue, check the dialogue. That's a really good thing. And make sure that that the world doesn't disappear when dialogue is emitted, that there's going to be breaks and silences and sense information, in a silence, you're going to hear things that aren't in the, aren't able to be heard when people are speaking. So that's a good thing to check for. Um, and then if the dialogue is always about what it's about, um, that there are times when people are worried about something and there's something, they talk about something else. And what's really going on is tugging at that conversation. Um, So you can just say, too on the nose. People don't speak in, real people interrupt each other. Nobody gets a speech unless there's a power imbalance. So take a look at how much people are talking, whether it's, does it seem like actual speech? And look for conflict, which is not, no, you didn't. Yes, you did. No, you didn't. Yes, you did. It's conflict is the pressure that people put on each other to get what they want. So you do have to figure out what people want. And if you can't tell, that's something you can bring up. I don't feel what they want in this scene or what Junior wants in this scene. What does he want from her? And what does she want from him? And that's a good thing to, have a conversation about with the author, you know, um, or at least they should be thinking about it if you're in a situation where people are not responding, which is usual, but not universal. Um, but making sure there is conflict. If there is no conflict, you don't need dialogue. You can do it in narrative. The dialogue is for the conflict. And we all forget that. We all forget that. So, it's something that you can remind pretty much anybody of, including me, including people who've been writing for 25 years. Um, the one of the dialogue problems that people have often is it's all mouth, blah, 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 blah. But in dialogue on the page, people are thinking. You have a point of view character, and they need to think while the person's talking. They react to what the person's saying. So you can say, I don't see any reactions. I don't see any internals here. What is Johnny thinking? Well, Jose talks about his dreams and goals. Johnny has to have reactions, thinking. Johnny says something, but he thinks something else. The internal world of the protagonist has to be there as well. You can look for something that I used to get called on, which I always appreciate, is the proliferation of characters. I'm somebody who creates a lot of characters. It's just like popcorn. That's the way I write. That's the way I think. And it some of the most helpful critique is sometimes somebody saying, you really don't need Joanna here. You've got Sue and, Sue and Judy, and you're not really using Joanna anyway, So why don't you get rid of her? It simplifies the scene. In a lot of cases, fiction is like Ikebana. You use it's using the minimal amount of materials to create the story, to fill the space, rather than inserting someone just because you can have 4 people instead of 2 people. Think about it. So consolidation of characters. Description. There's, in description, there's always a balance between letting us know what something looks like, where you are, what they're handling, the sense description, and the flow of the work. So if you notice that if somebody likes to do a lot of description, which I do, it helps occasionally to have somebody in your group go, this is all very beautiful, but it really slows the scene down. I think you could trim it back. And if you're fast, you can show them where they could trim it down, but at least show them where it needs to be. In this scene between Paul and Pierre, I don't really need a complete examination of the tabletop where their coffee and cigarettes are. It slows the scene. I don't think so. In an active scene, the more action is going on, the less description of landscape and static things are going to be. It's going to be happening too fast to look at the sunset. So that's something you can look at, the balance between flavor and overloading. But this is, now we're starting to get into the areas where you have to not be a person who is insensitive to the style of the writer. So if they do write a lush prose, with lots of description, you can say, I think that right here there's a little bit too much description, rather than saying you over describe your prose is this, that, or the other. Try to be really specific, because you don't want to be adversarial, saying, oh, that person just likes minimal work and he doesn't understand me. That you're taking in the overall style, but saying right here it gets in the way. And now we're getting into other things that writers can find irritating. So you can note whether we've gone a ways without sensual detail. There should be smells, there should be light, there should be sounds, ambient sounds. There should be texture. And some people write a pretty straightforward prose, but it is so enlivened by the senses. So you might say, I don't know what this room looks like, or I don't know where the light's coming from. Is there, are there any sounds? I don't hear any sounds. It, you know, so very, don't overdo it, but suggest the addition of some sense impressions if they don't have any, because it puts the reader in the body of the story, into the body of the character. Um, you have the character, just took a gut punch from somebody, and then they go on as if it didn't hurt. Let's hurt. Let the reader feel it. Let the reader feel winded and gasping, and hope they didn't rupture anything. And you can't even straighten up because they've, give yourself, uh, ask yourself whether the characters actually are feeling what the writer has set up. Um, praise what works. Praise what works as well. Oh, I love the, sensual description. Oh, I love that dialogue. Oh, this nice. This was working. Love that phrase, that metaphor, whatever. Keep a sharp eye out for that. Then there's the sentence. Okay, so senses praise the good. Sentences. This is where the rubber meets the road, frankly, to borrow a cliche. Um, the work on the sentence is absolutely essential for good writing, but people see it as um, a niggling side issue or a footnote or something. When we polish it, I'll worry about that. So definitely start with story, start with the more blocky, foundational kind of things. People are much more receptive to that kind of information. Um, the sentence on the sentence level is where people get very touchy, so be careful. But you can note, the sentences here, the verbs are not very vivid. And then you can circle all the wases and, the terrible 20, like, see, you know, it's like I'm seeing a repetition of verbs that aren't very lively. I think that you can, when you go over this again, you might take a look at your verbs, because I know that, there um, you can find livelier ways of describing this otherwise vivid scene. Be very tactful because you don't want to be that, that teacher's pet kind of a person who's always niggling the typo person. But this is not typos. This is the real guts of the engine. And you want to be able to say it, and you want to be able to say it in a way that people will not reject it. But all the sentences here are all kind of all the same length, and it's a little bit. It doesn't match the mood of this, or it doesn't. I think that some punchier sentences in there, shorter sentences, would help, give a wake up to to this section. I think that it's all the same sentence structure. I mean, that nobody wants to hear that is the problem. So you have to find a way to note that some variety in the sentences would make it livelier or make it more interesting to read. Word choices, you know, watch for those cliches, you know, and then ask for specifics, like what kind of a car was it? What kind of a coat was it? That's using the full vocabulary is a really important thing to do. Um, but people can get bristly about that. But also you can praise the good, you know, that, oh, I love these sentences in here, the sound of that was just gorgeous. The rhythms were especially good here. Um, so with sentences, try to be very sensitive about, you don't want people rejecting what you're saying just because they find it nitpicky. It is not nitpicky. And that's, really an important part of being a better writer is to write better sentences. You can say in here, I didn't see it as vividly as I think you'd want me to. And that's a word choice and a sentence structure kind of thing. And watch for metaphors, praise good metaphors, and suggest, I could use a metaphor in here, when you're describing how the light is doing something, you could, that's a good place for a metaphor. Um, so look for good words, crunchy words, words that kind of blow your hair back. Woo, that was good. Hi Blair, when you are doing it on the page with a pen, you check those things. And then person gets back a manuscript that's covered with those checks. They know they're hitting it. When there's only one, it's like, I'm not writing that well, am I? So Blair says, how do you make comments to help writers incorporate more complex ideas or ideas about people or life into their work? I feel that is an issue that can elevate work, but it's hard to comment on. What a good question. I had my writing teacher, Kate Braverman, used to say, if you can have your characters thinking about dinner or thinking about God, have them thinking about God. She called that taking the next step. Take the next step, which is you make an observation and then you take it the next step. What does it mean? What does it mean? Always pushing people to a deeper understanding of life, because it used to be people didn't read self-help books. They read fiction and expected the author to have ideas about life, not just about, will so and so marry so and so, and what about the whale? It's not, Moby Dick isn't a fishing story. It's a story about humanity. So here you are, you're writing a story, there's a conflict. Characters have a whole universe inside them. They've read certain things, they've thought, they worry about certain things. If you have a character who's, say, an elderly person and worried about a fall they've taken or something like that, you can get out of ow, 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 my leg hurts, into, what is it to be older? What is it to be, take the next step. Uh, think, get your head out. You can't say this to people because that won't be productive. You're trying to say, get your head out of the nuts and bolts of your story, the mechanics. People sometimes get caught up in the mechanics, which is why I say, start with story, because that's what they're looking for usually for crit. They're usually looking for nuts and bolts. But at some point, there's more fiction than nuts and bolts. You're working through a point of view of a character, or you're having the narrator directly speaking to the reader. but see if you can elevate, ask them, right in here when Johnny's waiting for the ambulance, can you make a comment about the human condition that we're all sort of sitting on the kitchen floor waiting for the paramedics? To lift it out of the moment into the timeless realities of human life. That's the kind of comment you can make. And the more specific you can be, like where in the manuscript, here, this would be a good time to think about, something, a bigger issue. Move to the bigger issue. And you do it by, when I'm writing on the manuscript with pen, I often have a little suitcase, which means unpack that. That's the place for it. So when people are thinking nuts and bolts, you're giving them a nut and bolt. You're telling them where you kind of want a bigger thought. Move to a bigger thought is something that you can say. Because that will really open things up. And it's not always easy to do. And people who don't think that way at all are can be a little baffled. So it helps to show them where Paul can have a bigger thought. Otherwise, you write it on the top or the bottom of the manuscript. They hear you, but they don't quite understand what you want. So I don't know if Mark has joined us, but I don't know if we've addressed some of the things that you've been looking for. What else do you have trouble in workshop expressing to people? But definitely to employ more complex ideas. Not every character is capable of complex ideas, but they're all, even children, if you can remember summer days of sitting on the curb sharpening popsicle sticks, you can have a larger thought. Where does the water go? Where do my dreams go? What's going to happen when I'm older? You see some older kid coming by, and it's like it's like a foreign country. Are you afraid of getting older? It just seems too hard. And my sister with her boyfriends, it's too hard. I don't know how they know how to do things like that. But it helps to be able to, in workshop, to be able to point out those moments to people. What else can I say? Remember, when you praise for certain things as they come along, rather than, "Ooh, I really enjoyed this." Well, so what? Because there are going to be people in your writing workshop that you don't like their work particularly. You don't care for motorcycle stories. You don't care about fishing or football or whatever it's about. But you can still offer helpful critique on what is there. It still has characters. It still has description. It still has, it's the scenes. Something has to happen in the scene that the character cannot go back to the way it was before. The senses are going to be there. It's still going to be made of sentences. So even if you're not crazy about their story, you can still be useful to them. Oh, good. I'm glad, Mark. I'm glad you're here. And is there anything that you have further question about? I'm happy to, we have a few more minutes. I'm happy to respond to anything. just know that as you work your way up the kind of the Maslow pyramid, the hierarchy of needs, as you go from story, dialogue, point of view, um, into description, senses, and sentence, people get more sensitive as you go up, and you don't want to be annoying. Um, Often, when I get into the sentence stuff, I'll write it on the page, um, and not necessarily point it out in the group, because it takes, it's smaller scale kind of stuff. But if they have cliches, make sure to circle. Even situations that play out in a very cliched way, you can say, I'm sorry, I know that you need this scene with Barbara and Betty, um, but I feel like I've seen this scene before, and how can you twist it so that it's more surprising to the reader? And if you say the reader, meaning you, but if you depersonalize that, that's very helpful. What's helpful to the reader, rather than I didn't like this, but um, this was confusing for the reader, rather than I don't get it. All righty. Well, anybody else find in your writing groups crit that's been helpful to you? Do certain people in your writing group have certain specialties that are good? Um, Blair says, I often comment on a lack of conflict in a scene. That's right. But that gets interpreted as lack of argument, physical action. Are there better ways to talk about conflict? Yeah. Okay, so dialogue is only about conflict, which is just one person pressing against another person. One person wants one thing, one person wants something else, and then it's the byplay. And that is the only reason that there is dialogue. So, um, lack of conflict, you will say, in this dialogue section here, they seem to agree. I don't get a sense of anybody putting pressure on anybody else and how it's going to turn out. Somebody wins and somebody gets their way and somebody doesn't. Um, uh, so you can say there's a lack of pressure. There's a lack of um, instead of conflict, it's that pressure, because say conflict can be people who basically want this. I mean, anybody who's been on a committee, and everybody wants the same thing. You're all do-gooders. You all want to do good. You all want you know the situation to resolve, but everybody has their own point of view of how it should be resolved, and there could be conflict even if you want the same thing. I often say it's like the difference. It's like being in a bar, and you meet, you're there to meet someone, and you're there to take somebody home. That's why you showed up. And some guy sits next to you, and a totally appealing guy, and he's like, okay, let's go. And you want that. You'd rather have a little bit more of an exchange, and they are ready to go, and you're like, oh, let's have a what do you think about this band? And there's conflict even if people want the same thing. So you can think of it as um, it can be a dance, you know and how people move as they're being, the pressure back and forth, and something has to happen. There has to be a change um, as a result of that conflict. So that's helpful. Um, Mark says, a challenge is when writer presents scenes out of order. It's hard to comment on the larger story. Yeah, don't. Talk about the scene itself and the dynamics of the scene, and where is the change in the scene. So yeah, it's very hard, because even if they're in order, it might have been last week, 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. I don't even remember what comes before or after. So I'm dealing with the scene as it is. And that all a story is a succession of scenes that are pressure. Each scene resolves to something that then moves you into the next scene. Um, but yeah, that is a challenge, especially if it's a plot oriented type of story, like a mystery. You know, if it's out of order, you forget where the impulse comes from. I agree with that. All right. Well, I think that so Blair, was that a good, was that, did that make sense? The lack of conflict, how to talk about it? Yeah, when I started and I heard about conflict, where's the I just thought you have to have conflict, so everybody's always arguing. But it was the arguing kind of on the level of, yes, you did, no, you didn't, yes, you did, no, you did. And people walking around pissed off, which is not, you want variety. You can tell people too, Mark, if people do present in order, you can say you've had 3 argument scenes in a row. You need something else. You need the reader to have a breather somewhere. Um, so anyway, I wish you good critiques. And yeah, Blair says, I'm always tempted to have back and forth arguing all the time and have to refrain. Yeah, you cut to the essentials, make sure they don't agree, and then somebody wins and somebody loses. That's a power, uh, an exhibition of power, um, even if it's very subtle. Like who gets to sit at the table? Who gets, what is it, the homicidal bitching that goes on in every kitchen over who should serve and who should eat? Isn't that's a out of a Leonard Cohen song? Um, yeah, so the back and forth arguing, it can't stay at the same level. You need rise and fall, rise and fall. Sometimes this person gets a good blow in, and then this person tries a different tactic. They moving around like boxers. They don't just, there are some boxers who aren't very talented or just strong and endure, but a good boxer, we'll circle around, we'll look for an opening, we'll try something else, to get what they want. So you can always say there's a monotony to the, or don't use that term necessarily, but I'm noticing that it's all on a level, and you might get some hills and valleys in there. Um, yeah, movement and change in the dynamic. That's a very musical way of looking at it. So anyway, this is our last Writing Wednesday of the year. I wish you Happy New Year, and we will see you next week for Writing Wednesday. Thank you for coming, and if you have not subscribed, please subscribe. It encourages me to keep doing this. All right, well, thank you very much, and see you next year. Bye.